Hello, I'm Brooke, a 29-year-old woman. I was born into a lower middle income family, so while we did have enough money to sustain ourselves, we didn't have enough to actually go out or buy a lot of nice things. With that in mind, I always worked really hard to get to where I am right now. I didn't make a lot of friends growing up because I was always so busy studying and when I was old enough working. My dedication to my studies paid off and I was able to get a full ride at a good college. It was here that I met my ex-husband, Chris. Chris and I were part of the same friend circle and ended up dating fairly quickly after we saw each other. We dated for around 4 years before we decided to tie the knot. Of course, we had a lot of ups and downs in our relationship, but nothing destroyed us in any way. Eventually, after years and years of hard work, I managed to get a really good job that allowed me to live pretty lavishly. Except that I couldn't live lavishly. Chris didn't make as much as me, so I was stuck footing all our bills. Chris only paid rent and utilities sometimes. Even then, I loved him a lot and I was okay with it. We never had many fights and were living pretty comfortably. There was only one point of contention between Chris and me buying a house. I'm not going to lie that I have wanted to buy and own my own home. It's always been my biggest dream. In my head, the day I managed to buy a house was going to be the day that I knew that I made it. It would be the day that I knew just what I was capable of doing. Unfortunately, it wasn't time for that yet. Chris also shared my dream. He too wanted to own his own house and get to live in a place that he could truly call his own. We had many conversations about our dreams when we were dating, but while I thought we were on the same page about our finances, we were not. Chris was under the impression that we both made more than enough to buy the house. The thing is, first of all, Chris made significantly less money than me. I mean, he barely made half my annual income. And secondly, Chris had a terrible credit score. He was always late to pay off his credit bills and always withdrew more than he could pay off. I will admit that his financial condition caused a lot of tension between us in the first 2 years of our marriage. We never moved in together before getting married and we always kept our finances separate. So to find out just how miserably he had been living was a slap in the face. But I loved him too much to ever leave him for it. So I decided to take care of him too. We were married and I believed in his burdens being mine as well. I started helping cover not only his share of the utilities, but also helping him pay off his credit loans. It took me a good year to get his credit score raised at least a little bit. And of course, because I was constantly paying for everything, I had no opportunity to save. For some reason, Chris believed that we had a lot saved up. He never contributed to any of the savings. He just expected me to have saved up. So to say he was unhappy about me not having saved anything would be an understatement. What do you mean you have no money saved up? I mean exactly that. How? How can that even be possible? You can't be serious. Did you even contribute to saving anything? Oh, come on. You know that I never had that kind of money to spare. Right, and neither did I. Explain to me how that is even possible. You make double what I make. Well, you have a crap ton of debt and barely contribute to our living expenses. Everything I earn goes into making sure we live well. I didn't ask to live well. I don't mind living frugally. That's the biggest lie I ever heard. The one time I tried to save on money and bought all the generic named products, you made such a big fuss about it. And before you say that I hadn't told you about making the switch, I very much did. You even agreed to it back then. That week was hell for me because all you did was whine and complain. So you definitely can't tell me that you can live frugally. So are you trying to say that I'm the reason we can't buy our own house? I'm not saying that, Chris. I'm just saying that it will take longer than expected. How much longer are we going to have to rent? With the money we're paying in rent, we can easily make a down payment for a new house. It's really not as easy as that. But why do you need a house right away? We have a long time to spend together. We're still really young. Let's just get your credit score going well so that we can both properly own the house without having to face any issues. I will make sure that we will start house hunting the second we're both doing well with our credit scores. All right. I was upset at how adamant Chris was about getting a house. I hated that I had to placate him as if he was a child. He was old enough to know how things worked. Even if I did save up the leftover money every month, we still wouldn't have even a quarter of the required deposit. Not to mention, I would be the only one under whose name the mortgage would be taken out. I didn't want to be responsible for such a large sum alone. Chris was still huffing about it in a subtle way to remind me that I had disappointed him, but I simply couldn't bring myself to care about it. He should be grateful that I even stayed with him after I found out about his financial condition. The way he was so ungrateful only fueled the irritation I had inside me. Once a week, Chris would tell me that he was the only one in his friend group who didn't have their own home. He told me over and over again how shameful it was for a 30-year-old man to not own his own place. He tried every technique of emotional manipulation available under the sun to try and get me to buy him a house. All that made me feel was disgusted with him. I don't know where he expected me to pull that kind of money from. And then things got worse. Once Chris realized that his tactics weren't working, he invited his mother, Doris, over to try and convince me. Of course, he invited her over when I was at work, so I was surprised to see her there. "Oh, hey Doris, what brings you here?" I invited her over. "Chris was telling me about something the both of you are struggling with." "Huh? We're struggling with something? Since when?" "Is this one of your problems, Chris? That she conveniently forgets things?" "No, that is not a problem. I'm simply confused because as far as I know, Chris and I aren't facing any issues." "Then why was he so upset about buying a house?" "Oh my God, Chris, you actually went crying to your mom about this?" "He is my son, and I have raised him well enough to come to me whenever he wants to." "I'm actually glad that you raised him healthily, but I didn't mean it like that. I simply mean that I thought that we arrived at a conclusion about this." "And what was the conclusion? That you'll make him wait another 5 to 10 years for him to finally own a house?" "If that's how long it will take, then yes." "How can you deprive him like this?" I don't know if Chris outlined the entirety of our conversation yesterday to you, but like I told him, I haven't saved up enough to even consider making a deposit. Even if I do manage to get a mortgage with his crappy credit scores, which I helped raise, by the way, I'd have to bear the sole burden of it. And why is bearing the sole burden an issue? Do you not love my son enough to go through with it? I love Chris a lot, but I'm not stupid. It's simply logical to do that. Why don't I lend you some money, and you guys can get started on the deposit? I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid that I don't want you to help me in any way. I want to buy a house with the money that I earn. If Chris wants to use your help, he's free to do so. Now, if you'll excuse me, I had a tiring day at work, and I would like to freshen up and get some rest. I could hear Doris talking about how selfish I was to withhold something as big as this from Chris, but quite frankly, I really couldn't bring myself to care. I didn't think I had it in me to actually keep explaining the same thing over and over again to both of them. I decided that the day had been way too long to dwell on what happened immediately, so I took a hot shower, and once I was all clean, I sat on my bed and really thought about the conversation I had with Doris. First of all, for Chris to call his mother just to get me to agree was enough to make me angry. I hate to involve others in issues in my relationship, and this was something he knew about. The fact that he thought involving his mother in this would change my mind made me feel a little disgusted at how desperate he was to own a house, that too only because he wanted to be like all his friends. If he wanted to be like all his friends, he should probably have tried and worked as hard as they did. They had money because they worked for it. Chris was satisfied with the minimum wage desk job that he had since he graduated college. He saw no reason to try and get a better job. I did, to get him to change jobs and find better opportunities, but he got too comfortable with his work. The thought of changing seemed like too big a hassle. The second thing I thought about was Doris's question about why, if I loved Chris, I was not willing to bear the load of being the only one legally responsible for paying the mortgage. Again, because I did not want to involve her in the intimate and personal aspects of our relationship, I did not answer that. The truth was that Chris was very irresponsible with even what little money he earned. If we were to take out a mortgage, I would need him to contribute his part, or else we'd have our dream home but no food. There had been many months where within a week Chris would have splurged his entire salary on these meaningless things that he would simply store away and never look at again. It was only because I had enough money that we were still surviving. And like I was saying earlier, moving to a better job was too much of a hassle for Chris, so did that mean that he did not love me enough to make a change? Why was it only me that had to get the blame? I saw no reasoning in that argument of hers, but even if I told them all of this, I knew that they would have found one way or another to turn it back around on me. There was no use arguing with them because it truly felt like talking to two walls. That night, Chris texted me and told me that he was staying with Doris for the night. He told me he expected an apology from me to both him and his mother. Of course, I wasn't going to do that. I had nothing to apologize for. If anything, they should be the ones apologizing for putting me in such an awkward position where I was purposely being painted as a villain. I called my best friend Willow over because I felt like I was actually losing my mind over all of this. I needed someone to tell me that I was not insane. When she came over, I gave her a gist of what had happened. What is wrong with the both of them? I honestly don't know. When both of them kind of just ganged up on me, I really felt like I was committing some crime, but not giving them what they wanted. Oh, sweetie, no, you're perfectly sound in your reasoning. Right? If Chris had even waited a year, just enough time for me to save a good enough amount, I wouldn't have to be here. Why does he want his things right then and there? Has he always been this way? Now that I think about it, yeah. It was either he got his way or I had to deal with his tantrums. That's not healthy. Did you talk to him about it? I did at the start of our relationship, but that clearly did nothing. I guess I learned how to deal with it. This, however, is not just something I can deal with. Well, what happens when he doesn't get what he wants? He either sulks for days, and I have to make it up to him in some grand gesture, or he gets what he wants somehow. I have never bothered to ask him how he got things, but I bet it has to do with Doris. Oh, definitely. But don't you think that Doris might try to do something to get him that house? I see no way for her to do anything like that. Unless, obviously, she takes a mortgage out in her name, but she already has a mortgage to pay off. I don't know what she'll do, but I know that something smells fishy. They will get it some way or another. What Willow was saying did make sense. She did actually point out something that I hadn't thought about. I didn't want to think that Doris and Chris were capable of doing something so crappy that I needed to be prepared for it, but I also knew that it was better to be safe than sorry. Chris didn't come back home the next day either, so Willow and I decided to go and buy some hidden cameras and plant them all around the house. Thankfully, I could access all the footage from my phone, so I got to see whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I will admit that at that time I still felt guilty about planting cameras around the house without Chris's consent, but Willow reminded me that this was a safety measure to ensure that nothing harmed me in any way. Even what I knew of Doris, I knew that she was always ready to play dirty to get what she wanted. Even at our wedding reception, there was a slight miscommunication with one of our caterers, and Doris did not hesitate to file complaints with their higher bosses for us to have had a good enough discount. So I knew that if it meant bribing or yelling at someone, Doris would have no problem doing it. Chris came back home the next day, but he refused to talk to me. Of course, I didn't want to talk to him either because I had no reason to cave in at first. And that was how it was for the next few days. Chris slept in the guest bedroom and avoided me at all costs. I did notice one thing though, and that was the fact that Doris seemed to be coming over a lot more. Initially, I only heard him talking to her on the phone a lot. I tried to watch the camera footage, but Chris barely said much during those calls and seemed to only be listening to whatever Doris was saying. When Doris did come over, the two of them would lock themselves in the guest bedroom for hours and discuss something in hushed voices. So I obviously went over the footage of the camera to see what was going on in there. Most of the days, they were only talking smack about me. It hurt to hear Chris talk about me so rudely, and like he didn't care about me at all. It put things in a different perspective to me, and I guess I knew at that moment that I wanted to get out of our relationship. There was one conversation of theirs that really caught my eye. "So, have you spoken to her?" "No, why should I? She hasn't apologized to us." "That's good. You should never give in, or she'll think that she has all the power." "I just don't like this, though. I didn't think we'd ever be this way." "Oh, honey, some people only show you their true colors after you marry them. They know that once they've got you, there's no reason to keep being the way they were." That's so messed up. I'm not even asking for anything big. I just want us to stop paying rent and live in our own place. "Oh, I know. I was in the same position with your dad." "Really? What did you do?" "At first, we fought a lot, just like you and Brooke right now. But then I tricked him." "Tricked him?" "Oh, yeah. And I'll do just that with you." "What do you mean? What kind of tricks?" "Just wait until tomorrow. You'll understand everything. You just have to promise to do whatever I say. If you do what I say, you'll have that house that you want." "All right. I'll do whatever you want." My heart raced at the thought of me being right. I knew that Doris would do something, but even after watching the recording, I didn't know what exactly. Just like Chris, I too had to wait to find out what her big plan was going to be. The next day, however, I was completely swamped by work, so I had no way of monitoring what was going on at home. By the time I got back home, I was so tired that I was just ready to fall asleep. That was when Chris walked into the door all happy and sat down on the couch next to me. He pulled me into a hug, and I was so confused by his shift in behavior. Then I remembered that something must have happened for him to be this happy. I made an excuse about needing to wash up and ran back to our room. I quickly looked at the recording and realized that Doris had forged some documents to get Chris the house. I looked through my bank accounts and realized that the mortgage had been taken out in my name. She had Chris forge everything and potentially ruin my credit, all because Chris wanted something. I was furious, but I knew that it was too late in the night to get anything done. The next morning, I took a day off work to find a lawyer. I updated Willow on everything, and she accompanied me. We filed for forgery and got all the legal things worked out. When I went back home, Chris still looked like he was on cloud 9. Doris was also there, and she looked smug. "Brooke, you didn't go to work today?" "No, I needed to get some things sorted out." "Oh, what is it?" "Chris, tell her the good news." "What good news?" "We're getting a house." "How is that even possible?" "That doesn't matter. Mom found a way to make it happen." "Right, by forging documents in my name?" "What?" "Don't even try to play dumb right now. I know about what you guys did. How did you even think that something that stupid would work? Look, all that matters is that we will soon have our house. Did you really want a house so bad that you were willing to commit a crime for it? How fragile and big is your ego? I just want us to have a good life. If that's an issue, then you have some things to work through. Accusing me of having a fragile ego is unnecessary. Forget that, but I am accusing you of committing a crime. What do you have to say about that, huh? Saying that you wanted a better life for us is not a justification a judge would like to hear. Whatever. There's no way for you to prove what we did. Really? I pulled out my phone and showed Doris and Chris the recording of their conversation. They both went pale and looked at me in panic. I just smiled at them and told them that I had already spoken to a lawyer who had helped me press charges against them. I told them that they better lawyer up fast. I then packed a bunch of my things and made my way to Willow's house. From there onwards, I was in court every other week. Chris and Doris tried to villainize me, but that was still no reason for forgery. Surprisingly, Chris tried to claim that he had been coerced by Doris into signing the documents. However, that didn't play out so well, considering there was no threat made by Doris against him. Since this was Doris's second time committing forgery, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison, whereas Chris was sentenced to 2 years. I couldn't believe that I knew and interacted with actual criminals. That's always a weird thing to think about. But I managed to get my credit score back up and managed to have the loan against my name cancelled. I also broke the lease of my current apartment and moved in with Willow until I can get back on my feet. It's been a few months and I'm still reeling about everything that happened. I hope that the time that Chris and Doris serve will enable them to actually reflect on their behavior and learn from it. I also filed for divorce and managed to fully and finally free myself from this toxic relationship. Things are looking up for me and I'm slowly getting over all the heartbreak that comes with the end of a relationship. Thank you for listening.